At 7:15 a.m., Jefferson International Airport is already a hive of activity families juggling strollers, business travelers fiddling with spreadsheets, and vacationers savoring their last moments of leisure before boarding. Moving seamlessly through the crowd is Monique Rivers, a tall, confident black woman who, at a glance, seems just another passenger in a well-tailored blazer. Yet her unhurried manner and sharp gaze hint at a deeper purpose. As a senior operations director for StarLink Airlines, a major carrier with a commanding presence in this very terminal, Monique is on a covert mission to understand how everyday travelers experience the airport without the protective veil of corporate privilege. Unbeknownst to her, Officer Raleigh, a veteran airport police officer notorious among some of his colleagues, has been watching from a distance. He's widely believed to single out black and other minority passengers under the banner of random checks. Though never officially charged, rumors swirl that his so-called vigilance seems to home in on travelers who look a certain way, travelers like Monique. She catches his eye not because she's acting suspicious, but because she moves with an air of self-assurance that to him reads as arrogant or defiant. Over the years, he's confronted countless black individuals who, like Monique, had simply been going about their business. Moments later, as Monique nears the TSA checkpoint, Raleigh steps forward and intercepts her. His voice is firm, loaded with an authority that suggests he isn't used to being questioned. He demands additional screening, implying she could be hiding something dangerous. Monique is startled by the hostility in his gaze. She knows this is more than a rote check. The tension between them crackles with unspoken layers. Her identity as a powerful executive and a black woman collides with his history of singling out people of color. Unsure whether to reveal her rank or quietly gather evidence of possible bias, Monique steps aside, heart pounding. Little does she realize this fraught encounter will trigger a chain reaction, prompting Jefferson International Airport to reckon with systemic prejudice and forcing Monique to decide how far she's willing to push for lasting, overdue change. Stepping away from the bustling TSA checkpoint, Monique Rivers could almost feel Officer Raleigh's gaze burning into her back as she tried to regain her composure. The wave of indignation she felt was disorienting. She'd been traveling through airports her entire adult life and had never been subjected to such blatant scrutiny. Still clutching her driver's license, she paused momentarily by a nearby seating area, heart thumping as she reflected on the officer's pointed questions. He had insisted it was just procedure, yet his sharp tone and refusal to offer any real explanation told a different story. Instead of the standard polite inquiry about her flight or boarding pass, he had demanded to know why she was traveling alone, why her luggage was so light, and why she seemed too calm. Although Monique was quick to answer each question, the undercurrent of suspicion in his voice felt deeply personal. With each passing second, it became clearer that the checkpoint fiasco was no simple mix-up. As she found a quiet corner to slip back into her heels and reorganize her belongings, Monique recalled overhearing rumors about certain airport police officers who habitually targeted black travelers. She used to dismiss such talk as exaggeration. Surely there were protocols to prevent abuses of power, but her encounter with Raleigh forced her to reconsider. The prickling sense of injustice stayed with her as she walked away, determined not to let one jaded official ruin her morning. Yet she also knew she couldn't simply forget what had transpired. If this was happening to her, a senior operations director at StarLink Airlines, what must everyday passengers experience? She tried to push the incident from her mind long enough to board her flight, reminding herself that she was on the clock, so to speak, gathering first-hand observations about check-in processes for an upcoming efficiency report. But the nagging thought of Officer Raleigh's interrogation lingered, and by the time the aircraft was airborne, Monique realized she was more rattled than she cared to admit. Her sense of duty, however, outweighed any desire to remain silent. Almost reflexively, she pulled out her phone to email Lena Carter, her trusted colleague at StarLink. Monique typed a brief but pointed note. "We might have a problem at Jefferson International, possible profiling. Need to talk ASAP." Tucking her phone away, she considered how best to document her experience. She had no intention of making unfounded accusations. But if Officer Raleigh had a pattern of targeting people who looked like her, the airport needed to know. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Monique made a vow. She would do whatever it took to expose unfair treatment and protect future travelers from an ordeal that, for her, had already cut much deeper than any standard security check ever should. An hour after touching down in Chicago, Monique Rivers found herself rushing through a short hallway toward a glass-walled conference room, determined to keep her mind on the day's agenda despite the unsettling questions swirling in her head. Once she settled at the large oval table with a few colleagues there to discuss terminal redesigns for StarLink Airlines, she felt a familiar buzz from her phone. Expecting a message from Lena Carter, she instead saw an unknown number with a Jefferson area code. Curiosity won out over caution, and she excused herself to a quiet corner to answer. On the other end was Jordan Webb, a TSA agent from Jefferson International, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. He hesitated, as though debating whether to reveal something that could jeopardize his own standing. Finally, Jordan confessed he had recognized her at the airport, one of the perks of occasionally collaborating with StarLink's security team on training sessions, and had been deeply troubled by how Officer Raleigh had singled her out that morning. "Listen," Jordan said, voice trembling ever so slightly. "I'm not calling in any official capacity, but I can't just sit back and watch travelers, especially black travelers, get treated like they're guilty until proven innocent." He described seeing Raleigh perform similar spot checks more times than he could count, consistently targeting individuals of color with vague excuses. Monique's heart sank as he recounted how few complaints ever stuck, often because passengers were either too weary or too intimidated to pursue the matter. The conversation left her reeling. She now had confirmation that her gut feeling about Raleigh hadn't been an overreaction. Even so, Monique felt a pang of concern for Jordan, who risked professional backlash just by sharing what he had observed. Their call ended with an unspoken agreement. She would do whatever it took to bring the issue to the airport administration's attention, and Jordan would discreetly gather any data that might strengthen her case. When Monique returned to the conference table, she found it almost impossible to focus on the proposed lounge design or gate reconfiguration spreadsheets. Instead, she jotted down mental notes about her next steps, confirming if others within StarLink had heard similar stories, briefing Lena Carter, and contacting Stuart Collins, StarLink's Vice President of Security, if the rumors proved substantial. By the time she left the meeting, her day's priorities had shifted entirely. Tired though she was, Monique felt a sense of clarity. The burden of doubt had lifted. The situation with Officer Raleigh was indeed more than a one-off incident. Walking out into the brisk Chicago air, she realized she was no longer just following her own moral compass. She had a genuine responsibility, bolstered by Jordan's confidence in her, to champion fair treatment for every traveler who passed through Jefferson International's gates. Stepping off the plane back at Jefferson International, Monique Rivers felt a renewed sense of purpose as she navigated the familiar terminals and made her way to StarLink Airlines' corporate offices on the 4th floor. Just days earlier, she had left for Chicago amid uncertainty, carrying only Jordan Webb's quiet plea for help and her own unnerving encounter with Officer Raleigh. Now, as she headed to her scheduled meeting with Stuart Collins, StarLink's Vice President of Security, she felt more prepared, armed with both personal conviction and the kernel of evidence that might prove Raleigh's pattern of discrimination. Pushing through the frosted glass door to Stuart's office, Monique found him studying a row of security statistics on a wide monitor. He greeted her with concern etched into his features, gesturing for her to take a seat. Over the next half hour, Monique recounted the details of her run-in with Raleigh, followed by Jordan's unsolicited yet invaluable phone call. Each time she mentioned Jordan's name, Stuart's brow furrowed. A TSA contact willing to vouch for potential misconduct was no small thing. Monique laid out her suspicions carefully, explaining she suspected this was not an isolated incident but rather a systematic targeting of black travelers or anyone else Raleigh perceived as different. Stuart, a former law enforcement officer himself, listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. He confirmed that he too had heard vague rumblings about an overzealous cop, though few of those stories ever reached official complaint status. It was one thing to have rumors floating around. It was another to gather enough legitimate proof to spark an investigation. Together they identified key steps. Monique would discreetly reach out to Lena Carter for potential communication support, in case StarLink needed to handle any public fallout. Jordan Webb would be asked, if he felt safe doing so, to provide rough dates and times of Raleigh's questionable stops. And Stuart would tap his professional network to see if other airline employees or terminal staff had witnessed similar patterns of harassment. They discussed the risks Raleigh was likely protected by a strong union and might retaliate if he sensed a formal inquiry looming. Monique's jaw tightened at the notion, but she refused to be deterred. Her ultimate goal, she explained, was to protect travelers from experiences like the one she had endured, whether they were high-ranking executives or everyday flyers on a family vacation. As she rose to leave, Stuart assured her he would back her pursuit of the truth. His parting words resonated like a solemn pledge. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it the right way." No one is above scrutiny, not even a veteran officer. Feeling an odd mixture of relief and trepidation, Monique stepped back into the corridor, already formulating a plan for how to proceed once she gathered the courage and the evidence to confront Officer Raleigh's conduct head-on. Early the next morning, Monique Rivers set aside her tailored business attire and opted for a more low-key approach, determined to blend in among everyday travelers and gather real-time observations on the ground. She tucked her StarLink Airlines badge out of sight, as she often did during these incognito walkthroughs, but her purpose today felt more urgent. Ever since her meeting with Stuart Collins, she had been keenly aware that confirming Officer Raleigh's patterns of behavior might require direct observation, risky as that might be. With a silent prayer for composure, she entered the concourse where crowds were already thick. Wheelie bags clattered across the floor. Parents corralled restless toddlers, and seasoned road warriors silently navigated the lines with practiced efficiency. Monique drifted closer to the security checkpoint, scanning the area for Raleigh's distinct silhouette. She spotted him almost immediately. He stood off to the side with his arms folded over his chest, his gaze roaming from passenger to passenger. The moment her eyes settled on him, she felt that same uneasy prickle she'd experienced before. Carefully, Monique positioned herself in a nearby line, intent on observing how he interacted with others before he noticed her. Within minutes, she watched him step forward to pull aside an older black couple, demanding additional ID checks. There was no evident cause, no fluster, no unusual luggage, just a quiet pair of vacationers. The couple seemed confused but complied, their discomfort palpable. Monique's pulse quickened. She recalled Jordan Webb's warning and realized this might be exactly the sort of random stop that wasn't random at all. She fished out her phone, surreptitiously typing a message to Lena Carter. Raleigh at it again, possibly targeting another black couple, taking notes. Yet before she could hit send, Raleigh's gaze locked onto her. In an instant, he was pushing past bystanders to approach. Trying to maintain a neutral demeanor, Monique braced for what she knew was coming. "Ma'am, I need a word," he barked, gesturing for her to step out of line. The hush that fell over nearby travelers was familiar by now, as was the flare of adrenaline in Monique's chest. Despite her frustration, she answered him calmly, asking if there was a specific issue with her boarding pass or identification. Raleigh's eyes narrowed, as though trying to decide whether to escalate or let her go. From the corner of her eye, Monique could see the older couple still waiting, clearly anxious. She considered revealing her corporate role in an effort to defuse the situation, but a protective instinct stopped her. She wanted to see if he had any legitimate reason for singling her out. As tension rippled through the surrounding crowd, Monique forced her voice to remain steady, silently vowing to relay every detail to Stuart Collins and Jordan Webb. In that moment, she realized just how precarious this game of cat and mouse had become, and how critical it was that she expose Raleigh's patterns before more innocent travelers found themselves trapped under his suspicious scrutiny. Just minutes after stepping away from the security checkpoint, Monique Rivers found her pulse still hammering in her ears. She had hoped that once Officer Raleigh reluctantly released her, she could quietly slip into the crowd and make a few notes on what she had just witnessed. Instead, she heard his voice again, clear, loud, and edged with anger as he cut through the flow of travelers in Concourse B, determined to follow her. A hush seemed to fall over the immediate area, as if the sea of passengers sensed tension rippling in the air. People clutched their bags and glanced around, some discreetly taking out their phones. Monique knew she was now part of a spectacle, but she refused to let panic break her composure. "Hold it right there," Raleigh demanded, stepping directly in front of her. His posture was tense, shoulders squared. In the ambient chatter, Monique could pick up bits of murmured questions. Who is she? Why is that cop yelling at her? Even gate agents paused to look on, their tasks momentarily abandoned. Monique braced herself, meeting Raleigh's gaze steadily. This time, he made no mention of a random check, launching instead into accusations about her suspicious movements and questionable behavior. Her mind flashed back to the older couple he had cornered just moments ago. She wondered where they were now, likely still recovering from an encounter they never asked for. Summoning the calm that had eluded her earlier, Monique raised her chin. "Officer, I have every right to walk through the airport without harassment," she said, her voice measured but resolute. "If there is a legitimate security issue, I suggest we call your supervisor immediately." Raleigh's expression wavered, a mix of fury and uncertainty. Around them, camera phones captured the moment, the tension emanating like static electricity. Monique considered pulling out her StarLink ID, but a part of her hesitated. Revealing her corporate status might de-escalate the confrontation for her personally, yet it wouldn't necessarily protect those who could not wield such influence. Just then, a firm, authoritative voice resonated from the perimeter of the onlookers. "Officer Raleigh, that's enough." Monique turned to see Chief Patricia Noble, the head of Jefferson International's internal security, arriving with brisk, purposeful strides. Relief washed over Monique, and a wave of whispers ran through the crowd. The chief demanded clarification on the situation, and Raleigh started to sputter about following protocol. But Chief Noble gave him a pointed look that signaled she wasn't buying it. Addressing the gathering onlookers, the chief assured everyone there was no threat, urging them to continue on to their gates. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Monique exhaled, aware that this explosive confrontation had just cemented the stakes and that whatever came next would determine not only her own sense of safety, but the future of how travelers at Jefferson International would be treated. The day after Monique Rivers' explosive public confrontation with Officer Raleigh proved to be anything but calm at Jefferson International. The airport corridors buzzed with whispers and half-hushed conversations, as travelers and employees alike swapped versions of what really happened in Concourse B. By mid-morning, Monique was summoned to a small, windowless meeting room near the airport's administrative offices. Waiting there, alongside Chief Patricia Noble and several other key figures, she learned that the airport's Internal Affairs Division had launched a formal review into Raleigh's actions, spurred by multiple witness accounts, and that her testimony would be a crucial component. While Monique was relieved to see swift action, she couldn't help noticing the ripples of discord this had sown among the rank and file. She overheard murmurs about Raleigh's police union preparing a staunch defense, insisting that he had been simply doing his job, and that the confrontation with Monique had been blown out of proportion. The tension was palpable. Some officers bristled at the idea of a high-ranking airline executive challenging one of their own, whereas others, quietly relieved, admitted they had grown weary of Raleigh's pattern of stopping black and minority passengers. When she finally sat down with the Internal Affairs panel, Monique recounted the sequence of events: his abrupt questioning at the checkpoint, his aggressive pursuit in the concourse, and his unwavering insistence that she posed some vague but imminent threat. She offered details about having seen him single out other black travelers, and mentioned the older couple whose frightened expressions she couldn't forget. Across the table, Chief Noble sat with steely resolve, making notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. From time to time, Monique caught Noble's eye and sensed an unspoken agreement. No matter the outcome, they would not ignore the possibility that the very systems meant to protect travelers had instead been twisted into a tool of intimidation. Meanwhile, news of the investigation spread beyond the airport's confines. A few local journalists sniffed out the story, and Monique found herself fielding inquiries from the press. She referred them to StarLink's communications director, Lena Carter, wary of turning this into a public spectacle, yet recognizing the importance of transparency. The more she spoke to investigators, the more she realized the precarious balance. Her evidence had to be airtight, or else Raleigh and his union could spin the narrative against her. Regardless, she remained steadfast in her decision to cooperate fully. After all, she wasn't just seeking justice for herself, she was fighting for every traveler who had faced unwarranted scrutiny, every TSA staffer like Jordan Webb who worried about speaking up, and every airport worker afraid that Raleigh's authority might trump basic fairness. By the end of the day, as she walked through the terminal's hushed corridors, Monique felt a mixture of determination and apprehension, bracing herself for the next phase of a process that would test her resolve and potentially reshape Jefferson International's culture for good. By the time the official disciplinary hearing against Officer Raleigh was convened, the tension at Jefferson International seemed to coalesce into a single charged atmosphere. Held in a modest, wood-paneled conference room just off the main administrative wing, the session brought together representatives from the airport's Internal Affairs Division, security administrators, select witnesses, and Raleigh's union-appointed counsel. Monique Rivers arrived with her heart pounding, accompanied by Chief Patricia Noble, who had made it clear that the airport would pursue a thorough and impartial inquiry. Cameras were barred from the hearing, but a small knot of reporters and curious onlookers lingered outside in the corridor, hoping for any sound bites or offhand remarks that might shed light on the unfolding proceedings. Inside, Monique found herself seated at a rectangular table facing a trio of stern-faced officials charged with reviewing evidence and determining Raleigh's fate. To her left sat Jordan Webb, who had braved potential fallout to share what he knew about Raleigh's history of singling out black travelers. He offered Monique a tense but encouraging nod, clearly anxious about publicly testifying. Across the table, Officer Raleigh sat beside a union representative, his posture stiff, hands folded on the table, projecting an air of cool defiance. The hearing opened with formal statements, each side laying out its version of events. The Internal Affairs lead investigator recounted Monique's initial random stop at the TSA checkpoint, her subsequent encounter in Concourse B, and the broader concerns about Raleigh's alleged pattern of targeting minority passengers. Raleigh's counsel attempted to characterize his actions as diligent security work, casting vague aspersions on Monique's motives, insinuating that she, with her influential position at StarLink Airlines, might be using her corporate clout to manipulate a personal grievance. Monique bristled at the accusation but kept her composure, awaiting the moment she could speak for herself. When called to testify, Monique recounted, in calm, measured detail, the unsettling nature of both confrontations. She spoke of the older couple she believed Raleigh had also stopped without cause, as well as Jordan Webb's quiet warning call that first alerted her to the officer's reputation. Jordan then took the floor to corroborate her account, providing the dates and times of several questionable stops he had personally witnessed. His voice quavered at first, but steadied as he described Raleigh's tendency to eye black travelers more than others. Throughout, Raleigh sat expressionless, though occasionally leaning over to whisper to his union representative. As the morning slipped toward afternoon, each piece of testimony wove together a pattern that grew impossible to dismiss. Monique sensed the officials' resolve to seek truth rather than cover up wrongdoing, particularly as they pressed Raleigh to explain why so many of his random stops failed to yield any legitimate concerns. By the time the hearing adjourned for lunch, the atmosphere felt both electric and weighted, as though the entire airport awaited the panel's decision to either reaffirm old power structures or forge a new path toward accountability. By the time the official disciplinary hearing against Officer Raleigh was convened, the tension at Jefferson International seemed to coalesce into a single charged atmosphere. Held in a modest wood-paneled conference room just off the main administrative wing, the session brought together representatives from the airport's Internal Affairs Division, security administrators, select witnesses, and Raleigh's union-appointed counsel. Monique Rivers arrived with her heart pounding, accompanied by Chief Patricia Noble, who had made it clear that the airport would pursue a thorough and impartial inquiry. Cameras were barred from the hearing, but a small knot of reporters and curious onlookers lingered outside in the corridor, hoping for any sound bites or offhand remarks that might shed light on the unfolding proceedings. Inside, Monique found herself seated at a rectangular table facing a trio of stern-faced officials charged with reviewing evidence and determining Raleigh's fate. To her left sat Jordan Webb, who had braved potential fallout to share what he knew about Raleigh's history of singling out black travelers. He offered Monique a tense but encouraging nod, clearly anxious about publicly testifying. Across the table, Officer Raleigh sat beside a union representative, his posture stiff, hands folded on the table, projecting an air of cool defiance. The hearing opened with formal statements, each side laying out its version of events. The Internal Affairs lead investigator recounted Monique's initial random stop at the TSA checkpoint, her subsequent encounter in Concourse B, and the broader concerns about Raleigh's alleged pattern of targeting minority passengers. Raleigh's counsel attempted to characterize his actions as diligent security work, casting vague aspersions on Monique's motives, insinuating that she, with her influential position at StarLink Airlines, might be using her corporate clout to manipulate a personal grievance. Monique bristled at the accusation but kept her composure, awaiting the moment she could speak for herself. When called to testify, Monique recounted, in calm, measured detail, the unsettling nature of both confrontations. She spoke of the older couple she believed Raleigh had also stopped without cause, as well as Jordan Webb's quiet warning call that first alerted her to the officer's reputation. Jordan then took the floor to corroborate her account, providing the dates and times of several questionable stops he had personally witnessed. His voice quavered at first, but steadied as he described Raleigh's tendency to eye black travelers more than others. Throughout, Raleigh sat expressionless, though occasionally leaning over to whisper to his union representative. As the morning slipped toward afternoon, each piece of testimony wove together a pattern that grew impossible to dismiss. Monique sensed the officials' resolve to seek truth rather than cover up wrongdoing, particularly as they pressed Raleigh to explain why so many of his random stops failed to yield any legitimate concerns. By the time the hearing adjourned for lunch, the atmosphere felt both electric and weighted, as though the entire airport awaited the panel's decision to either reaffirm old power structures or forge a new path toward accountability. The panel reconvened after what felt like the longest 20 minutes of Monique Rivers' life. Silence hovered in the small conference room, broken only by the rustling of papers and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Officer Raleigh sat rigid in his chair, union representative close by, while Monique waited with bated breath. Chief Patricia Noble and Jordan Webb stood to one side, both visibly tense yet determined to see justice done. Finally, the lead investigator cleared his throat and announced that, based on the testimonies and evidence presented, Officer Raleigh had demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory stops in direct violation of airport policy and civil rights standards. The panel officially recommended his immediate termination. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the room. Monique felt an odd blend of relief and exhaustion flood her system. It was over, at least formally. Raleigh opened his mouth as if to protest, but his representative placed a cautionary hand on his arm, indicating that no further arguments would help now. He shot Monique a look of raw anger before pushing back his chair and walking out, leaving the union representative to gather files and follow behind. For a moment no one spoke, the weight of the verdict settling in. Then Chief Noble stepped forward, offering Monique a small, solemn nod that conveyed both apology and acknowledgement. Outside the conference room, the corridor was still occupied by a few reporters who had refused to leave, each vying for a statement. Monique paused, acutely aware that she stood at a crossroads, one path leading to a spotlight she had never sought, the other to a quiet return to her corporate role, letting the official announcement speak for itself. At the gentle prompting of Lena Carter, who had appeared with a microphone in hand, Monique decided to give a brief statement. She simply expressed gratitude for the thorough investigation, underscored her hope that all travelers would henceforth feel safe and respected, and declined to comment further. Her words, though succinct, carried the weight of every passenger who had ever felt the sting of undue suspicion. In the days that followed, Jefferson International began implementing new protocols. Chief Noble mandated mandatory bias training for all security personnel, while Jordan Webb found renewed courage to speak up whenever he noticed questionable behavior among colleagues. StarLink Airlines, supported by Monique's testimony and expertise, worked closely with airport authorities to create a more transparent complaint process. Meanwhile, everyday travelers only sensed the faint ripple of changed shorter lines, friendlier exchanges, and fewer random stops that felt arbitrary. Late one evening, Monique walked the terminal again, this time openly wearing her StarLink badge. She passed a bustling concourse filled with families and business travelers, quietly gratified by how normal everything seemed. Though her heart remained heavy for those who had endured similar harassment without the means to fight back, she felt a measure of hope that Jefferson International had taken a crucial step forward. In an environment defined by constant departures and arrivals, she realized true change might come gradually, one checkpoint, one policy revision, one act of courage at a time. For now, at least, she could rest, knowing that her stand had helped reveal the frailties of a broken system and sparked a collective resolve to fix them. In our daily journeys, we often rely on the kindness of strangers, especially in large, bustling places like airports. This story highlights a crucial truth. No one is immune to bias, not even those with decades of experience or impressive titles. Monique's determination to confront prejudice head-on reminds us that speaking up can spark real change in the most unexpected settings. For older adults especially who have witnessed significant shifts in society, this emphasizes the need to remain vigilant about fairness, equality, and respect. Over a lifetime, we learn that even small acts of injustice can linger and grow unless we challenge them. By reporting wrongdoing, supporting others who do the same, and passing on our hard-earned wisdom, we help create a safer, more nurturing environment for everyone. Whether in a bustling terminal or a quiet neighborhood, how we treat one another shapes the legacy we leave behind. Even simple steps, like sharing personal stories of overcoming bias, can inspire younger generations to embrace empathy and stand up for what is right. Ultimately, it is never too late to use our voice fortified by a lifetime of experience to guide society toward greater compassion and accountability for all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.